Hello and good morning, everyone, and welcome to your early morning briefing for Tuesday, the 8th of October, 2024. I'm your host, Mike Shelby, and with that, let's go ahead and jump into our top item of the day. This is something that was published recently by the Defense Science Board. It's been a long time since we've talked about the Defense Science Board, but one of the things they are tasked with is looking at the implications of science and technology for the Department of Defense. Before we get started on that, I've been running around so much over the past few weeks, I've completely forgot to mention it on this show. If you're looking for additional intelligence training, I'm doing an online series, and it starts tonight. I announced this a couple weeks ago, and I just forgot to say it on the show. It's the pre-election intelligence workup. I'm going to be teaching students how to identify protest areas and activists and militant groups taking part in post-election unrest. So if you're interested in learning how to set up an automated open source intelligence system to track your local protests, riots, stop the steal 2.0, possibly political violence, hopefully not, but maybe something even worse than that, I have a link to sign up in this morning's report. You can just you can go to www.areaintelligence.com and then click on get started. All right, with that, Robert, good morning. Let's go ahead and jump into the Defense Science Board. They say that conflict in the homeland is, quote unquote, effectively underway, and they're really specifically talking about cyber operations in the United States. This is the Defense Science Board. Their latest report makes some startling conclusions about U.S. critical infrastructure resilience in a time of war. Some of this stuff we've talked about. There are some newer details, however. They write, quote, conflict is effectively underway as adversaries, such as China and Russia, acquire ever-expanding access and prosecute sophisticated cyber operations against key civilian infrastructure targets. Their stated intent is to disrupt or disable civilian infrastructure on which the DoD depends, the Department of Defense depends. And so this report also concludes that successful cyber or physical attacks could prevent U.S. forces from mobilizing or deploying during a crisis or armed conflict. Again, this is with China. They say, quote, the Department of Defense must prepare for attacks on the homeland. They've been putting this stuff in the national defense and national security strategies, I think, since at least 2018. That's the first time I saw it. There was a question, I think Bad Wabbit asked yesterday, why are these cyber intrusions, cyber exploitation, why are they not characterized as an act of war? And it's very interesting, Robert, because this Defense Science Board report actually says that the DoD currently characterizes these foreign cyber exploitation, cases of foreign cyber exploitation as competition and not conflict. They say this is not conflict related to just peaceful competition with China, apparently. This report also encourages military leaders to work with civilian infrastructure owners, such as grid operators and others, also identify vulnerabilities, hold contingency exercises, and to communicate information to drive offensive operations. Robert, the picture that I get from this is defense leaders are worried about the vulnerability and maybe challenges to resiliency of the civilian power grids, which the DoD is still largely reliant on. Is that, you read that report also this morning? I have any other takes on that?
Yeah, I think the idea of competition versus conflict is interesting because I think that this infiltration of U.S. critical infrastructure, water, wastewater, et cetera, telecoms is Chinese cyber deterrence. I think this is cyber deterrence in effect. In practice, in the U.S. is trying to play catch up on cyber deterrence. And that was my experience working on a project for the Secretary of Defense, Office of Secretary of Defense, a couple of years ago. And to me, this reads like they still haven't solved that problem.
Mm-hmm. One of the things we were talking about before the show, apparently China has gone through and replaced all its hardware. So there's maybe not zero, but there's much less of a concern about U.S. backdoors, like NSA backdoors on their actual hardware. Is that correct?
Yeah, they replaced all of their American-made stuff with Chinese domestically manufactured computers and network hardware.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. So since 2020, at least, I first noticed this, that December 2020 Army report. I mention it somewhat frequently, a couple times a month maybe. Since then, we have discussed in the report and on the show the implications of not just cyber attacks, but also physical attacks or physically enabled cyber attacks, a complex attack. Also, the use of violent social groups, transnational criminal organizations being used effectively as proxies for foreign adversaries. There's some plausible deniability there where we say, this is not China or Russia attacking the United States. This is a cartel. This is some other criminal group here. And I think one of the most glaring conclusions here is that cyber and physical disruption or these attacks are very likely intended to hamper or prevent mobilization and deployment of U.S. forces during a period of crisis or conflict. I've been talking about that for many years now. Beyond that, though, I think there's some other additional implications here. Persistent cyber attacks or persistent physical disruption is, I think, it is intended, or at least partially intended also, I think, to target American morale and resolve in a period of crisis or conflict, because persistent attacks, especially ones that the U.S. government or the American military or our institutions are powerless to prevent, I think it's going to undermine public trust and faith in these U.S. institutions. And I think it's also going to be used to pressure Americans, to pressure their politicians to withdraw or escalate. We go back to that unrestricted warfare manual that was published back in 1999. I think back in 2020, I did a book review, and I did a chapter by chapter breakdown of everything they said. And one of the things that I thought was most interesting is the Chinese People's Liberation Army, the PLA strategy to defeat the United States. They're pretty explicit in that their goal is to force the United States to choose between national survival and its geopolitical or strategic goals. I think they're trying to back the United States into a corner, at least according to this manual, unrestricted warfare, back the United States into a massive dilemma where they either choose national survival or they choose to stop the Chinese takeover of Taiwan. And when you frame it like that, if the Chinese can actually do that, then the United States is obviously going to choose national survival. This manual, unrestricted warfare, also makes very clear that China is going to use quote unquote non-military war operations. Those are things like trade wars and economic and financial warfare, ecological warfare, what they call quote unquote new terror. And again, this was published back in 1999, so it predates 2001. But they want to subdue the United States. There's a whole section on how Americans think of weapons of war one way and the Chinese way of thinking about weapons of war. They talk about non-weapons of war. And all of the things, we refer to this as irregular warfare or low-intensity conflict, asymmetric warfare especially. But all the ways that they can prosecute a war against the United States without actually shooting any bullets. And so I think this is in a non-nuclear worst-case scenario, which is what we're just describing here, I think this becomes an issue of national credibility, national viability for the United States. It carries empire-ending implications. What happens if the United States loses this war? What happens if we don't respond in a strategically viable way? And this is also not even to mention all the extremely grave economic, financial, and monetary risks as well. And so, Robert, thanks for standing by. I look at this and I say, these may actually be factors and good reasons why the United States does not ultimately go to war with China, similar to how the United States and Soviet Union did not go to a world war and engage in mutually assured destruction back during the Cold War. I think China would be very happy to avoid a shooting war with the United States and also with U.S. allies in the Indo-Pacific like Japan, India, Australia, others. And so I do think you bring up a good point about this being deterrence. It's like if China holds the sword of Damocles over the United States, they may have some leverage in persuading or influencing or coercing a president not to go to war with China. I do think, however, this is a feasible risk that we may encounter by the end of this decade. It is a scenario that I think you, reading and listening and viewing, should strongly consider preparing for. Robert, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so a lot of officials have been saying that they're pre-positioning to conduct a cyber attack before a crisis or conflict. I think that's backwards. Like I said earlier, I think this is cyber deterrence in practice. If a cyber attack does happen, something like a massive cyber attack on the U.S., I think it will actually follow the beginning of a crisis or conflict. It will be a response, because the point of it is to deter, the U.S. basically dipping into the Indo-Pacific. And looking at that bipartisan National Defense Strategy Commission report, the China also has a military advantage there. So even if the U.S. takes the risk of ensuring freedom of Taiwan or influence in the Indo-Pacific, we might not even win and might end up with both military loss or stalemate and a devastated homeland.
Mm-hmm. That fight sure is a long way over there. All right, let's move on to this Hurricane Milton update. You're in Florida. You're in the path. By the way, if Robert's not on the show later this week, it's because he has no power or internet. Robert, put your floaties on. I don't mean to make light of it. Let's give us what you're looking at there in Florida. What's the latest from NOAA, the National Hurricane Center?
Well, they say that this has the potential to be one of the most destructive hurricanes on record for Florida. And they're also expecting it to grow in size as it gets closer to the coast. And we're seeing evacuations from Pinellas County, that's on the west coast, in the direct path of the hurricane. I think they're talking about almost 6 million people having to be evacuated. And the projections for the damage of this hurricane are almost double what are looking at almost double what Helene has been estimated at. And it's just, I think the destruction is just going to be much higher, and this is going to really strain FEMA's already strained resources, and strain Florida's resources. But I think also there's a longer term impact here on the election, because there's a lot of talk, these Western North Carolina districts are, very heavily favor Trump. And there are a lot of state election officials trying to rebuild infrastructure before the election comes. I think it's also going to be a situation here in Florida, and it's going to introduce another source of doubt over the outcome of the election, because I think state officials
Mm-hmm.
are going to move to push the elections back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so let's stay on this topic. I remember you talked about 6 months ago, FEMA basically saying it was going to run out of money before the end of hurricane season, where essentially almost the tail end or the back half of hurricane season. I think it ends at some point in November. We have House Speaker Mike Johnson saying that, I don't know, the latest I saw is they're not going to come back and pass new emergency spending until after the recess on November 12th. That's a month from now. What is I've also heard people say that Florida Governor Ron DeSantis can have a pro-gamer move here and just reject FEMA funding and somehow pay for it out of Florida's budget to basically just show that Florida doesn't need the federal government. What say you?
I'm not sure if Florida alone has enough money, just because of the massive amount of damage this hurricane could do. I did see some speculation about DeSantis not taking a call from Kamala Harris. And I've seen some competing narratives on that, where people in his office are saying he wasn't aware of the call, and then Harris is trying to say that he's politicizing the hurricane for Trump.
He did talk to Biden, though.
Yeah, and so I think that there is the potential for DeSantis to show that the FEMA is kind of a failing institution, and the current iteration of the federal government is losing legitimacy for actual reason, not actually being able to fulfill its function
Mm-hmm.
of being Americans.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, we'll keep our fingers crossed on Florida. And by the way, for those of you in Florida, let's jump over into the Florida chat, and let's make sure we get all of our area regional ham radio operators linked up. If this is another case where the Cajun Navy Relief we work with, they typically don't go into Florida. They stay like Texas and Louisiana. But if Cajun Navy Relief does go into Florida, we will be supporting them. Also, let's move on. It's not often that I see the federal government do something, and I'm impressed. Back in 2002, the GAO, the Government Accountability Office, launched an investigation into the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And one of the things they did was they said, let's see if we can spin up some fake businesses. We can print up some fake licenses to hold radiological material. Basically, you have to get some federal permit to be able to obtain radiological material. And they said, let's just print one at the office, a fake one. And they did that. And they were able to buy, using a fake business and a fake permit or fake license, they were able to purchase enough radiological material for a dirty bomb. And so in this report they released last week, the GAO, Government Accountability Office, says authorities have still not addressed some of the risks from a dirty bomb. And specifically, they call out the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. They say they have not implemented 11 out of the 18 of GAO's security recommendations made between 2012 and 2024. They've had plenty of time to do this. One of the big things is there are apparently levels, I didn't know this, but there are apparently levels of radioactive materials. And so apparently the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is not increasing security on some of those lower level radiological materials that still could be used in a dirty bomb. That was the whole point of this report. Now, part of this report says that the NRC has not incorporated socioeconomic considerations. Stuff like economic disruption and denial of access to affected areas if a radiological bomb or dirty bomb does go off. The cleanup costs from a dirty bomb attack, stuff like that. That's all pretty benign compared to not strengthening security measures to be able to track and also to control access to these lower risk radiological materials. Apparently, there's also a problem with NRC not increasing the vetting and verification measures for those seeking licenses to access radiological material, which GAO did with a fake business and a fake license here. This report does also cite that federal authorities remain concerned about the possibility that terrorist organizations could gain access to radiological materials. Clearly, it is a possibility here. All right, evacuation of international citizens continues in the vicinity of Beirut, Lebanon, as Israel and Hezbollah continue to trade missiles and rocket fire. Israel said they struck a Hezbollah intelligence headquarters, I guess the intelligence headquarters for Hezbollah, that's there in Beirut. Hezbollah said that they responded by launching rockets back against an IDF intelligence base outside of Tel Aviv. Meanwhile, Iran is still promising a harsh response if Israel strikes the country's nuclear infrastructure. They're calling that a red line. A couple of other interesting things I read this morning. According to recent comments from CIA Director Bill Burns, he says Iran is not rushing into building a nuclear weapon. We have known for some time that they have developed a delivery system, and he said that they could quickly enrich enough nuclear material for a single bomb. So that is, at least according to what CIA is willing to say, Iran could produce a single bomb pretty quickly. That is a red line for Netanyahu for sure. Also, Emirates Airlines, they're the biggest airlines in the whole region, by the way. They announced that all flights to and from Iran were canceled for today. I'm not sure if this is just for today or if it's going to be indefinite, but I saw that as a significant indicator. They also previously banned all pagers and walkie-talkies from air travel. They said the Emirati police they're going to confiscate all pagers and walkie-talkies if you bring them to the airport. Smart move. Also, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant is headed to D.C. to meet with Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin today. Over in Russia, their foreign ministry said they acknowledge the increasing importance of nuclear weapons in NATO's defense strategy. They also believe that de-escalation is unlikely due to NATO's military buildup in preparation for confrontation. By the way, both NATO and Russia are doing both of those things, building up their military and preparing for future confrontations. Russian officials also confirmed that they are maintaining a hotline with senior U.S. officials for emergencies, but it is not for any kind of routine communications. Also, Russia and China announced they are conducting anti-submarine warfare missions in the Northwest Indo-Pacific. This is part of ongoing exercises. They've been up in the Arctic recently and been engaging in other naval exercises. That's according to the Russian Pacific Fleet. And then finally, let's jump back to CIA again, because they announced that they are, quote, open for business. In a series of posts in Mandarin, Korean, and Farsi, that's a language spoken in Iran, or at least one of them, the posts were published on social media, video sites, dark web websites as well, and they're designed to recruit political dissidents in China, North Korea, and Iran. These posts contain instructions for safely getting in contact with CIA officers, and they had CIA previously cited some successes in recruiting Russian nationals via similar methods. And with that, let's go ahead and I think we do have a handful of questions here. All right, and what do you believe? Does Iran have the bomb or not? I have seen some people are saying that Iran already has the bomb. Maybe CIA apparently believes, at least publicly said they believe that they don't have the bomb. Robert, I'd be kind of hard pressed to believe that the Iranians have a bomb, have a nuclear bomb, and the Israelis don't know about it, or the Israelis do know about it but haven't done anything yet. I tend to say Iran probably does not have a bomb yet. I don't know. That's just my 96 Bravo intuition there. What say you?
I agree. In the past, Israel has actually struck Iranian nuclear facilities. And there was the Stuxnet thing. So I think if Iran did have a nuclear weapon, that would or should motivate Israel's reaction to the Iranian airstrikes and stuff like that, and their general attitude in the region towards Iranian proxies like Hezbollah. And considering what they are doing, I don't think they believe there's a threat from an Iranian nuclear weapon.
Mm-hmm. Right. Eric says he used to work the Iranian intelligence mission. Not going into detail, but I don't believe they have a bomb either. All right. I think that is it for the questions. Also, that's it for today's show. Everyone, thanks so much for the support.